On the night of September 13th, 2013, in Marietta, Georgia, the air held the quiet tension of late summer, settling into early fall. It was just past 11 p.m. at a Walmart located off Powers Ferry Road, one of those stores that rarely sleeps, where fluorescent lights hum overhead and the movement of carts and footsteps never fully stops. Inside, employees restocked shelves, night shift workers drifted between aisles, and the rhythm of an ordinary Friday night unfolded without urgency. But somewhere inside that vast retail space, a 26-year-old woman named Tiffany Whitton made what would become her final confirmed appearance. Cameras captured her in the store shortly before everything changed. What happened next would mark the beginning of a mystery that has stretched for more than a decade, leaving investigators, family members, and an entire community searching for answers. Tiffany had entered the store with her boyfriend, Ashley Red Caudle. Their presence did not initially stand out. To most people in the building, they were simply two more late-night shoppers blending into the steady flow of customers. But as the minutes passed, the evening veered into territory from which Tiffany would never return. According to verified reports, store security had observed behavior they believed to be shoplifting. Employees approached, a confrontation followed, and in a sudden break of motion, Tiffany ran. Witnesses recalled her sprinting toward the exit, pushing through the sliding doors, and disappearing into the darkened parking lot. It was a moment defined not by clarity, but by chaos, a brief, frantic scene after which she was gone. No one knew then that these were the last certain moments of Tiffany's life, as far as public records would ever show. As she fled the Walmart and vanished into the night, no one followed closely enough to see where she went. No one documented which direction she chose or whether she encountered anyone beyond the store's immediate view. There were no confirmed sightings in the hours, days, or years that followed. From that point onward, she simply disappeared. That exit, those few steps into the open air, became the dividing line between the life Tiffany had lived and the mystery that would engulf her name. The parking lot lights illuminated rows of cars. The hum of nearby traffic drifted across the asphalt, and yet nothing about the scene revealed what had happened to her. For investigators who would later retrace her path, it was a hauntingly ordinary environment. A retail plaza near busy roads, bordered by businesses and residential complexes, but offering no immediate clues. Tiffany was 26 years old, a young woman navigating personal struggles and a turbulent chapter of her life, but none of those details could explain how a person could vanish so completely in a populated area on a night filled with witnesses and surveillance cameras. And despite the presence of those cameras, the only verified footage was from inside the Walmart. Once she crossed the threshold into the darkness, the trail vanished. The moment raised more questions than answers. Why did she run alone? Why did no one manage to follow? How far could she have traveled before someone would have seen her? And how could a bustling metro area, even at a late hour, allow a person to slip away without leaving any trace? No belongings, no recorded interactions, no confirmed sightings. In the hours immediately following her departure, most people who had witnessed the confrontation had no reason to believe anything catastrophic had occurred. To them, it was simply an incident of shoplifting followed by someone fleeing the scene. But as the hours turned into days, and those days turned into weeks, the reality sharpened into focus. Tiffany Whitton had vanished under circumstances that would soon trigger one of Cobb County's most perplexing missing person cases. Her family would later describe the silence that followed her disappearance as devastating and unnatural. Tiffany, despite her personal struggles, had never disappeared for long without contact. But after that night, every phone call went unanswered. Every attempt to locate her led nowhere. Her social media accounts remained inactive. Her bank and phone records showed no further activity. It was as if she had stepped out of frame and no one had ever managed to capture where she went next. The disappearance began, not in a remote location, nor in an isolated wilderness, but in a bright, crowded megastore with employees, customers, lights, and cameras. an environment where anonymity seems nearly impossible. And still, the moment she ran, the world lost sight of her. From that final verified movement, Tiffany sprinting out of the Walmart doors, an entire investigation would emerge. Detectives would scour the details of her last known hours, study her relationships, analyze witness accounts, and attempt to rebuild a timeline that had fractured the instant she crossed the threshold into the night. But in these earliest moments, the picture is simple and haunting. A young woman, confronted by store employees, breaks into a run. She pushes into the parking lot, and under the glow of street lamps and the ordinary buzz of a suburban night, she disappears. This is where the story begins, with a date, a time, a store, and a final sighting. A moment preserved only in memory and fragmented reports, marking the start of a mystery, still without resolution. In the final hours before her disappearance, Tiffany Whitton moved through a series of moments that investigators would later analyze in painstaking detail. Each moment, though ordinary on the surface, became a building block in the timeline that now defines the last verified chapter of her life. Earlier in the evening, Tiffany and her boyfriend, Ashley, also known as Red Cottle, spent time together before arriving at the Marietta Walmart shortly before closing. The exact sequence of events leading them there has been documented through interviews and public reports, but the clarity of those accounts begins to fracture the closer the narrative comes to the moment Tiffany vanished. Even so, investigators have been able to establish the basic outline. Inside the Walmart, Tiffany moved among aisles stocked high with merchandise. The store's surveillance cameras captured her presence during this period, though the footage does not extend to everything that transpired. According to the verified reports available to the public, Walmart employees became suspicious of possible shoplifting. At some point, security personnel approached Tiffany and a confrontation unfolded. While details vary slightly across statements, the central fact remains firm. Tiffany suddenly broke into a run. She sprinted toward the store's front entrance and pushed through the doors into the night. It was just after 11 p.m. when Tiffany crossed that threshold. The parking lot was partially lit by overhead lamps, casting pools of illumination that faded into shadowed spaces between rows of cars. A few customers trickled out with late-night purchases. Vehicles pulled in and out of the expansive lot. Yet, amidst all of that movement, no confirmed sighting of Tiffany exists after the moment she fled through the doors. Her boyfriend, Ashley Cottle, emerged from the store moments later. He did not report seeing where she went. He would later describe the evening inconsistently, altering details with each retelling, something investigators would note but not use as evidence of wrongdoing. What mattered most was that he was the last known person to have been with her before she disappeared. As Tiffany ran, she left behind every trace of a normal night, her belongings, her communication, her routine. At the time, no one realized the significance of her departure. To witnesses, it appeared to be a shoplifting suspect escaping confrontation. What they did not know was that there would be no return, no attempt to reach out for help, and no confirmation of her condition once she left the store's property. The scene itself revealed little. There were no abandoned items found in the immediate area attributed to her. There were no signs of injury or struggle on record near the exit or the parking lot. No vehicle was identified as being connected to her sudden disappearance. The lighting, while functional, left many areas unmonitored and unobserved. The layout created natural blind spots where someone could fade quickly from view. And that is precisely what Tiffany did. She stepped into the darkness, and the trail evaporated. One of the most notable facts about the disappearance is the absence of any confirmed movement beyond the store's outer doors. In missing persons investigations, even a brief witness sighting can be pivotal. A direction of travel can define a search radius, but there was none here. No one saw her cross the lot. No one recalled her approaching the road or any nearby businesses.
No passing driver reported seeing a young woman running along the shoulder. No calls came in describing suspicious activity involving a woman matching her description. The last known event was the act of running itself. For investigators, this created an immediate challenge. The disappearance lacked the typical markers that anchor beginning stages of a case. No clear scene, no abandoned vehicle, no belongings scattered in a way that might indicate distress. The entire event unfolded in a matter of seconds, leaving only a single confirmed point on the timeline. Hours after she ran from the store, life in Marietta continued as usual. The Walmart closed and reopened. Employees returned for the next shift. Customers flowed in and out of the aisles without knowing the site would soon become central to a missing persons search. It would take days before the absence was officially recognized as something far more serious than a shoplifting incident gone awry. The next morning brought no sign of Tiffany. Her phone remained inactive. There were no messages to friends or family. Activity on her accounts, digital, financial, and social, came to a complete stop. Investigators would later emphasize this detail, noting that it created a stark dividing line between the hours before her disappearance and everything that came after. In the days that followed, the Walmart scene remained the only verified focal point for law enforcement. But even as they examined and re-examined the details, the reality remained the same. Tiffany had run out of a familiar, crowded place and dissolved into the night without leaving the trace investigators desperately needed. This event, this moment of flight and disappearance, became the hinge upon which the entire investigation would turn. A young woman left a store and was never seen again, and no physical element of the scene could explain how.
In the immediate aftermath of Tiffany Whitton's disappearance, there was no swift alarm, no urgent call to police, and no instant mobilization of resources. The night of September 13, 2013, ended without anyone realizing that a young woman had slipped into the shadows and failed to return. In the hours that followed, the world around the Walmart continued unchanged, unaware that the last confirmed sighting of Tiffany had already taken place. The earliest response came not from law enforcement, but from the gradual recognition among those close to her that something was wrong. Tiffany's family had seen her navigate difficult periods before, but she had rarely vanished without some form of communication. As the days passed with no calls, no messages, and no activity from her, concern deepened sharply. The silence felt unnatural. Even in turbulent phases of her life, disappearing entirely was not her pattern. When Tiffany failed to resurface, her family reported her missing. The official involvement of law enforcement began from that point, not at Walmart, not at the moment she ran into the night, but days later when her absence was undeniable. Once the report came in, investigators began building the earliest version of a timeline. Tiffany's final appearance at the Walmart quickly became the centerpiece. Detectives focused on gathering all available information from the store, surveillance footage, witness accounts, and internal reports from the employees who had been working that night. The footage showed Tiffany inside. It showed the moments leading up to the confrontation. What it did not capture were the seconds after she ran out. The cameras outside the store did not provide a clear follow-up. The last verifiable point was contained within the store's walls. Law enforcement conducted their first round of interviews shortly after the case was opened. Walmart employees recounted what they remembered: the suspicion of shoplifting, the confrontation, and Tiffany's sudden decision to flee. Their accounts were consistent in one crucial detail. Once she ran out the door, no one saw where she went. With no sighting and no immediate pursuit, the parking lot offered no definitive lead. Detectives assessed the scene in the days following her disappearance, focusing on the store's exterior areas. They walked the perimeter, examined the pathways leading in and out of the property, and reviewed what the environment would have looked like at the time Tiffany fled. The parking lot's lighting, the layout of the store, and the distribution of parked cars all contributed to the challenge. There were pockets of illumination, but also stretches where darkness gathered between rows of vehicles. Any of those areas could have concealed a person quickly and efficiently. As the initial canvas, investigators checked nearby businesses and roadways. They sought out potential witnesses who might have seen a young woman running late that night. Employees from establishments still open in the area were questioned. Passing drivers who might have been in the parking lot or on adjacent roads were considered, but no one provided a confirmed sighting. The absence of witnesses in a populated commercial corridor added a layer of difficulty early on. Forensic collection at the scene was minimal, not due to a lack of effort, but because there was no clear indication of where Tiffany had gone after exiting the store. A typical crime scene begins with a defined location, an abandoned vehicle, a residence, or a discovered item. Tiffany's disappearance offered none of those anchor points. Without a specific site of interest, investigators could not gather meaningful physical evidence. The parking lot did not present signs of a struggle, discarded belongings, or items directly linked to her. Realizing the limitations of the scene, the focus shifted toward reconstructing Tiffany's final hours before she went to the Walmart. Detectives contacted individuals within her social circle, friends, acquaintances, and anyone who might have interacted with her that day. These interviews provided context, but could not extend the timeline beyond the Walmart exit. What they established was a broader picture of Tiffany's life at the time, including relationships and routines, but nothing that pointed to her location after she fled the store. Attention soon turned to Ashley Red Caudle, the last known person to be with her before she disappeared. Law enforcement interviewed him multiple times, seeking consistency in his account. His explanations changed over time, something investigators noted carefully. But even with those inconsistencies, his statements did not provide a definitive direction for the search. He offered no verifiable location where Tiffany might have gone after leaving the Walmart. His residence was later searched, and although unrelated criminal matters would eventually lead to his arrest, no physical evidence tying him directly to Tiffany's disappearance was recovered. As the investigation expanded, the public began to learn of Tiffany's case. At first, awareness grew slowly. Missing person alerts circulated locally. Friends and family shared her story through posts, flyers, and community outreach. The case gained momentum not because of immediate media attention, but through the persistence of those closest to her. Their efforts drew more eyes to the case, and eventually broader coverage followed. Public reaction shifted gradually from concern to confusion. The scenario was unsettling. A woman vanishing in a well-lit, populated commercial area without leaving a single confirmed clue. People frequented that Walmart daily. They shopped in the same aisles, parked in the same lot, and walked through the same doors. The idea that someone could disappear from such a visible location challenged assumptions about safety and visibility. As days turned into weeks, law enforcement continued to reassess their earliest steps. They reevaluated witness accounts, revisited the Walmart location, and maintained contact with Tiffany's family. The case did not go cold immediately. Investigators continued following every lead brought forward, but with no new information, the initial phase of the response reached a natural limit. The scene itself had given all it could, which was very little. Still, the case remained active. Officers documented the gaps in the timeline. They identified inconsistencies in statements and evaluated each one. They tracked tips, pursued potential leads, and examined areas beyond the immediate Walmart surroundings. But with no physical evidence and no confirmed sightings, every path forward depended on information rather than discovery. By the end of the early response period, investigators had established only one immovable fact. Tiffany Whitton was last seen running out of the Marietta Walmart on September 13, 2013. Everything after that remained unconfirmed. The question of where she went and what happened to her in the minutes and hours after leaving the store would become the driving force of the investigation in the months and years ahead. As the earliest efforts of the investigation faded into the weeks and months after Tiffany Whitton's disappearance, the case entered a period marked by gaps.
gaps in the timeline, gaps in evidence, and gaps in the ability to connect her final moments to anything that came afterward. It was during this stage that the limitations of the initial response began to reveal themselves more clearly. What began as a structured effort to reconstruct Tiffany's last hours began shifting into a maze of uncertainty, where every turn seemed to lead to another dead end. One of the most significant obstacles facing investigators was the absence of physical evidence. The area outside the Walmart had offered nothing that could be definitively tied to Tiffany. Without items left behind, without confirmed sightings, and without leads generated by forensic collection, the case lacked the tangible elements that often form the backbone of missing person investigations. For detectives, this meant reliance on interviews, personal accounts, and behavior patterns, sources of information that are inherently less concrete than physical evidence. This deficiency made the reconstruction of the timeline more difficult. Tiffany's departure from the store was clear, but anything beyond that point became speculative, unless supported by confirmed reports. Law enforcement avoided speculation, staying within the bounds of known facts. Yet the lack of clear direction made it harder to establish next steps. Another central challenge emerged through the interviews conducted with Tiffany's boyfriend Ashley, Red Caudle. As the last known person to have been with her, he became a crucial source of information. Investigators interviewed him multiple times, gathering his version of events. But his statements changed across these interviews, a fact verified in public records and noted by investigators. In one account, he described the night in one sequence. In another, key details shifted. These inconsistencies did not prove wrongdoing, nor did they establish direct involvement in Tiffany's disappearance, but they created a fog around the truth and made it difficult for investigators to rely on his narrative to fill in the missing hours. Because of the variability in his statements, detectives had to widen their lens. They interviewed additional individuals within Tiffany's social circle, some of whom were familiar with the challenges she had been facing. These accounts added context, but did little to clarify the exact events of the night of September 13th. Some people remembered seeing Tiffany earlier in the day, but none could say where she went after leaving the Walmart. The investigation soon expanded into a broader search for patterns. Detectives examined her background, her known routines, and her history of relationships. They studied her phone records and financial activity, both of which stopped abruptly after the night she disappeared. This sudden halt reinforced the severity of the case. Still, it did not lead to new evidence. The digital silence provided important context, but no direction. With minimal physical clues and inconsistent witness narratives, law enforcement faced a series of practical limitations. Search efforts were limited by the absence of a defined search zone. Unlike cases where a vehicle or belongings are discovered, Tiffany's disappearance provided no clear starting point. This forced investigators to consider wide areas without knowing which were relevant. Searching without direction risked exhausting resources while offering little in return. Authorities did conduct multiple searches, both in the early months and later in the investigation. Some involved wooded areas. Some involved properties connected to individuals who had interacted with Tiffany around the time she vanished. But none of these searches produced evidence. Each one ended with the same result. No trace of Tiffany, no items left behind, and no indicators of a struggle or departure. While investigators continued pressing forward, the case began encountering structural setbacks. Tips came in periodically, but none were confirmed. Some callers believed they saw Tiffany in different parts of Georgia. Others reported encounters they thought might be connected to her. When these tips were evaluated, none could be verified as being Tiffany. The absence of confirmed sightings underscored one of the most troubling aspects of the case. From the moment she left the Walmart, no one reliably saw her again. Another challenge arose from the mere passage of time. The longer a disappearance remains unsolved, the more difficult it becomes to gather new leads. Memories fade. Witness availability becomes unpredictable. Surveillance footage from surrounding businesses had long since been overwritten by the time investigators began searching outside the Walmart environment. Anything that might have existed, such as a video from a nearby store camera capturing someone running, was no longer recoverable. Without forensic evidence, without preserved video, the first days after her disappearance represented a narrow window that had quietly closed before the seriousness of the situation was understood. This stage of the investigation also highlighted how Tiffany's social environment complicated the search. Many of the people she associated with at the time were difficult to locate or reluctant to engage in extended interviews. Some of them had their own legal issues, creating complications for investigators seeking cooperation. None of these individuals provided verifiable information that advanced the case. Early persons of interest emerged not through evidence, but through proximity to Tiffany's life during that period. Ashley Caudle was questioned repeatedly. Others within her social network were also interviewed. Yet none of these individuals produced enough information to move the case into a new phase. Law enforcement publicly stated that they believed foul play was involved in Tiffany's disappearance, but without evidence, they could not pursue charges. By this point, the public had become more aware of Tiffany's case, particularly as news outlets began reporting on the complexities of the investigation. The lack of progress frustrated both the community and those closest to Tiffany. Family members pressed for updates. Advocates shared her story online and in local media. Yet despite increasing visibility, the case itself remained stagnant. Leads continued to surface, but none held steady under investigative scrutiny. Even the most promising leads failed to generate new momentum. Some involved anonymous tips claiming to know what happened. Others involved people who believed Tiffany might have fled voluntarily. But each one, when examined, collapsed under the weight of verifiable facts, or the absence of them. During this period, investigators found themselves repeatedly returning to the same starting point, the Marietta Walmart. It remained the only definitive location connected to Tiffany's disappearance. Despite its familiarity, the location offered no additional insights. What happened beyond those sliding doors continued to elude everyone involved. As the investigative failures mounted, detectives documented each dead end, each inconsistency, and each gap in the timeline. They recognized the complexities of the case and continued piecing together the fragments of Tiffany's last night. But progress was slow. The foundational weaknesses, absence of physical evidence, lack of confirmed sightings, and conflicting accounts kept the case anchored in uncertainty. No one had been charged with Tiffany's disappearance. No new evidence emerged that could redirect the investigation, and with every passing month, the mystery deepened, leaving investigators with the troubling reality that they were no closer to finding Tiffany than they had been on the day her disappearance was reported.
Months passed after the initial investigation stalled, and the case of Tiffany Whitton hovered in a state of uncertainty. But there came a point when the trajectory of the search shifted. It was not a dramatic breakthrough or a sudden discovery of new evidence. Instead, it was the accumulation of persistent effort. Investigators revisited old leads, reopened earlier interviews, and began to reassess the case from the ground up. It was a strategic shift, one that would carry the investigation into its next major phase. The turning point began with the reassessment of the people closest to Tiffany in the weeks and days before she vanished. Among them was Ashley Caudle. Though he had already been interviewed multiple times, inconsistencies in his accounts had left unanswered questions. As months passed, his personal situation changed. He became involved in unrelated criminal matters that eventually resulted in his arrest. This development placed him back into the investigative spotlight, not as a charged suspect in Tiffany's disappearance, but as someone whose circumstances now required renewed scrutiny. Law enforcement recognized that the changing conditions around individuals within Tiffany's social circle could create opportunities for deeper insight. With Ashley incarcerated, investigators could re-engage him under new circumstances. They hoped that time, distance from the original event, and his new environment might produce clearer statements or clarifications. Interviews resumed, and although he provided additional details, they did not lead to new evidence. Still, the renewed focus marked a shift in the investigative approach. Authorities were no longer simply gathering surface-level accounts, they were testing each prior statement against the broader picture. Parallel to this, investigators revisited previous interviewees in Tiffany's social circle. Some individuals had been difficult to reach during the early phase of the case. Others had been reluctant to speak. Months later, the passage of time had changed their willingness to engage.
Detectives conducted additional interviews, cross-referencing new comments with earlier statements. They constructed a deeper understanding of Tiffany's relationships, her movements in the days before her disappearance, and the challenges she faced. This added context allowed investigators to refine the timeline surrounding the hours before Tiffany arrived at the Walmart. During this renewed phase, investigators also conducted a series of searches in locations connected to individuals within Tiffany's orbit. One of the most notable searches was a search of Ashley Caudle's residence carried out during his involvement in unrelated legal issues. The search was thorough. Authorities looked for any item, any physical trace that might connect to Tiffany. While the search uncovered evidence related to other criminal matters, nothing found tied directly to her disappearance. Still, the fact that the residence was searched represented a significant step. It demonstrated law enforcement's recognition that Tiffany's disappearance required deeper, more invasive investigative tactics. The expanded search efforts did not stop with one location. Other properties connected to people who had interacted with Tiffany were also examined. These searches involved wooded areas, residences, and stretches of land where people had spent time or lived. Despite the thoroughness, none of these searches produced the breakthrough investigators hoped for. There were no remains, no personal items, and no physical traces that confirmed Tiffany had been at any of these locations after she fled the Walmart. But these efforts were not wasted. Even without physical evidence, each search reduced the number of possible locations where Tiffany could have gone. Investigators were slowly narrowing the field. They had no confirmed direction of travel, but they could eliminate places that had once seemed plausible. This narrowing process became central to the second phase of the investigation. If the case could not progress through discovery, it would progress through exclusion. Another important development during this period involved community outreach. Media coverage grew, and as more people learned about Tiffany's disappearance, law enforcement received a wave of new information. Some tips were speculative, others suggested possible sightings, but a handful provided investigators with insights into relationships or interactions they had not fully explored. Although none of these tips directly solved the case, they pushed detectives to revisit earlier assumptions. The mere act of reevaluation allowed the investigation to evolve. One example involved clarifying Tiffany's last known interactions before visiting the Walmart. Some individuals recalled conversations, movements, or shared experiences earlier that evening. These accounts, when added to the timeline already constructed, filled in subtle gaps in the hours before Tiffany disappeared. The information did not change the fact that the Walmart was her last confirmed location, but it added texture to the hours leading up to that moment. Understanding her state of mind, her direction that evening, and her relationships provided investigators with a clearer lens. As detectives refined the timeline, they also refined the list of individuals who might hold relevant knowledge. No one was labeled a suspect without evidence. Law enforcement maintained a careful, neutral approach, avoiding speculation. But they did focus their attention more narrowly on those whose movements or statements intersected most closely with the events of that night. This created a more concentrated investigative framework. The case shifted further when investigators publicly acknowledged that they believed foul play was likely involved in Tiffany's disappearance. The statement did not reflect new evidence, rather it reflected the culmination of months of analysis. Voluntary disappearance cases often show activity, financial transactions, digital traces, or communication with acquaintances. Tiffany's case had none. The total absence of activity after her disappearance contributed to the conclusion that her case was not consistent with voluntary flight. This acknowledgement changed the tone of the investigation. With foul play considered a more probable explanation, the emphasis on earlier accounts, inconsistencies, and relationships took on renewed significance. Investigators once again reviewed every detail from Tiffany's last verified moments. They examined how long she was in the store, how long she was with Ashley that evening, and what interactions took place before, during, and after the confrontation with Walmart employees. Every detail was weighed, contextualized, and analyzed. As the case entered deeper into this phase, law enforcement came to a sobering realization. They had exhausted many of the traditional avenues of investigation. There were no new items to submit for forensic testing, no emerging witness accounts that could place Tiffany beyond the Walmart, no recovered belongings that could anchor for final movements. The investigation had reached a point where progress would rely not on evidence, but on time, on someone coming forward or on a change in circumstances regarding individuals connected to her life. Even so, the second phase represented meaningful progress. The timeline was clearer, the list of individuals with potential relevance was refined, the range of possible locations had been narrowed, and law enforcement had established with increasing confidence that Tiffany's disappearance involved circumstances beyond a voluntary flight. This phase did not provide a solution. It did not reveal what happened to Tiffany, but it brought structure to a case that had previously been defined by uncertainty. It laid the groundwork for the next stage, where the consequences of related arrests, public statements, and broader investigative efforts would shape the ongoing search for answers.
As the investigation into Tiffany Whitton's disappearance progressed through its early hurdles and deeper review, the case reached a stage that investigators would later describe as a resolution of what could be resolved and a confrontation with what could not. There was no final moment, no single discovery that tied the story together. Instead, this stage of the investigation became defined by what law enforcement could conclusively establish, what actions they could take, and what elements remained firmly beyond their reach. One of the clearest events during this period involved the legal situation of Tiffany's boyfriend, Ashley Red Caudle. Although he had been central to the investigation due to his proximity to Tiffany on the night she vanished, he was never charged in connection with her disappearance. But months after she went missing, he was arrested on unrelated criminal charges. These charges were tied to his own activities, separate from anything involving Tiffany. His arrest became a key moment, not as a resolution to her case, but as a factor that allowed investigators to pursue new interviews, reassess old statements, and evaluate him from a different perspective. The searches conducted at his residence as part of unrelated investigations became significant within the broader context of Tiffany's case. Law enforcement thoroughly examined the property for any indication that Tiffany had been there after she disappeared. They looked for belongings, forensic evidence, or any physical link to her. The result was definitive. No evidence was found tying him or his residence to Tiffany's disappearance. Every search concluded without uncovering items associated with her. This outcome shaped the investigative stance moving forward. Because no evidence linked Ashley Caudle to Tiffany's disappearance, law enforcement could not consider him a suspect in any formal sense. He remained someone connected to the case through circumstance, not through evidence. Interviews with him continued at various points, but none yielded the breakthrough detectives hoped for. Other individuals within Tiffany's social environment faced legal issues of their own over time. These arrests, like Caudle's, were unrelated to the disappearance itself. They stemmed from personal activities and circumstances that existed independently of Tiffany's case. Investigators followed each legal development meticulously, exploring whether shifts in circumstances might encourage new information. But none of these parallel events produced useful leads. No one in her social circle, despite interviews and legal scrutiny, provided evidence that advanced the case. This stage also brought clarity around the timeline of confirmed facts. Law enforcement affirmed publicly what their evidence showed. The last verified sighting of Tiffany Whitton was her running out of the Walmart in Marietta on the night of September 13, 2013. There were no confirmed sightings afterward. Reports that surfaced in following years, claims of people seeing someone who resembled Tiffany, were investigated, but each was ultimately ruled out due to lack of verification. No financial activity, digital activity, or personal communication emerged in the aftermath of her disappearance. That complete silence formed one of the few solid foundations of the investigation. With these details firmly established, investigators faced the inevitable. The case contained no physical evidence that could point toward a resolution. Without recovered remains, without belongings, and without confirmed interaction after the Walmart incident, the investigative process reached a boundary that could not be crossed through traditional means. Missing person cases often depend on tangible markers: a phone, a vehicle, clothing, a sighting, a message. Tiffany's case had none of these after the moment she ran from the store. This led investigators to communicate publicly an important conclusion. They believed foul play was likely involved in Tiffany's disappearance.
This statement was based not on a singular piece of evidence, but on the total absence of activity after she vanished. Individuals who leave by choice typically leave some trace. Tiffany did not. And although foul play was strongly considered, law enforcement emphasized that they lacked evidence identifying who might have been involved or what exactly had occurred. From a legal standpoint, the investigation had hit its limits. No charges could be filed against Ashley Caudle or anyone else without evidence. Law enforcement followed every credible lead but found no forensic proof, no eyewitness accounts beyond the Walmart, and no new items that could anchor the case. Each step of the investigation had been completed to a degree that allowed detectives to say with confidence what they did not have: no body, no crime scene, and no confirmed post-disappearance sighting. Despite these limitations, the case was never closed. Authorities kept the investigation classified as active but unsolved, allowing new leads, tips, or evidence to be examined at any time. The absence of closure did not mean the absence of effort. Detectives remained available to respond to incoming information, and the case continued to be reviewed periodically in accordance with department protocol for long-term missing persons. In the broader context, the resolution of this investigative phase highlighted the challenges that define certain missing person cases. Without evidence, law enforcement cannot move forward. Without witnesses, they cannot reconstruct events. Without a discovery, they cannot transition from a disappearance to a confirmed crime. Tiffany's case sits precisely in that space, a disappearance with no proven explanation, surrounded by people whose statements didn't align cleanly, yet unsupported by evidence that could link any individual to her fate. For Tiffany's family, the resolution phase offered little comfort. The official acknowledgement that authorities believed foul play was involved carried emotional weight, but no answers. The knowledge that no one had been charged reinforced the complexity and frustration of the case. Each public statement confirmed what the investigation had been able to accomplish and what it could not. The facts were clear, but the meaning behind them remained elusive. The public, too, faced the same reality. Awareness of the case grew over time, especially as the years passed without new information. But resolution did not come in the form of an arrest, a confession, or a discovery. It came instead in a clearer understanding of the limits, what investigators had found, what they had eliminated, and where the trail definitively ended. To this day, no one has been charged with any crime related to the disappearance of Tiffany Whitton. No legal action has been taken against any individual in connection with her case. The searches, the interviews, the re-examinations all serve to reinforce the same conclusion. The mystery remains unresolved. This phase marked the confirmation of the boundaries of the case. Investigators established everything they could with the facts available. They eliminated certain possibilities. They refined the timeline and the list of individuals connected to it. But ultimately, the case did not reach a point where it could be solved within the justice system. What remains unresolved is everything that happened after Tiffany ran into the night. Everything beyond that final, confirmed glimpse.
In the years following the disappearance of Tiffany Whitton, the ripples of that night extended far beyond the walls of the Marietta Walmart. They reached her family first, people who had known her not through the lens of a case file, but through shared memories, complicated histories, and the bonds that shape a loved one's life. For Tiffany's mother, her relatives, and those closest to her, the aftermath became a landscape defined by uncertainty, hope, and the heavy silence left behind when answers fail to emerge. From the earliest days of her disappearance, Tiffany's family took on the central role of keeping her story visible. They reached out to the community, contacted media outlets, and coordinated with law enforcement. Their efforts reflected a desperate but resilient commitment. They would not allow Tiffany's name to fade, even when the investigation reached periods of stagnation. They understood the reality of missing person cases, that visibility matters, and that every shared post, every article, and every interview can become the spark that leads someone to come forward. As the months became years, her family faced the emotional weight that comes with waiting for answers that do not arrive. Birthdays passed, holidays came and went, milestones that Tiffany should have been present for unfolded without her. The absence became a constant presence, one that shaped their lives in ways that were quiet and profound. Families of missing individuals often describe a particular kind of grief, one that does not resolve because it has no endpoint. Tiffany's family lived with that grief every day. In the community around Marietta, Tiffany's case remained a point of discussion long after the initial news coverage faded. Residents continued to share her photo on social media. Local forums revisited the details of her disappearance whenever new stories were published. Her name resurfaced during conversations about unsolved cases in Georgia. Even without new developments, the community maintained an interest in keeping her case alive. It became part of the collective memory of the area, a disappearance that happened in a familiar store, in a familiar city, under circumstances that felt too close to everyday life for comfort. Organizations dedicated to missing persons also played a role in extending the life of the case. They highlighted Tiffany's disappearance on online databases, circulated her information through national networks, and included her in events honoring individuals who had vanished without explanation. These efforts ensured that her name did not become one of the many lost in the overwhelming volume of missing person cases across the country. Law enforcement, for their part, continued to keep the case open. The classification remained the same, active but unsolved. Detectives periodically revisited the file, reassessing interviews and reviewing any new information that surfaced. While the investigation did not produce major developments in later years, the openness of the case allowed for the possibility of movement if and when new evidence emerged. Over time, the case became a reminder of how fragile the boundary is between the known and the unknown. Tiffany had disappeared not from a remote location, not under conditions that lent themselves easily to vanishing, but from a busy commercial area, under lights, near people, near traffic. And yet the story ended the same way many other missing person cases do, with a single verified moment, followed by silence. For investigators, the lingering questions remain the same. How could someone disappear in a place so public? Why was there no trace, no recovered belongings, no eyewitness account of what happened next? What transpired in the minutes after she ran out of the store? Did she encounter someone? Did she continue on foot into the night? Or did her disappearance unfold in a way the limited evidence could not capture? These questions persisted without answers, held back by the simple truth that no new information had emerged to illuminate what came after her final confirmed sighting. The unresolved nature of the case also shaped public perception. True crime audiences, community members, and those who followed the story often returned to the same point. Tiffany deserved answers, and someone out there might hold the key to finding them. Law enforcement echoed this sentiment, encouraging anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward. The belief that someone, somewhere, knew more than what had been shared became a consistent refrain. The years did not diminish the importance of the unanswered questions. Instead, they deepened the sense of urgency. With time, memories fade, but so does fear. Relationships change, circumstances shift. It is in those shifts that long-dormant information can surface. Authorities remain prepared for the moment when a new tip, a new confession, or a new discovery could push the case into a different trajectory. Despite the passing of time, Tiffany's story continued to resonate with those who encountered it. Her disappearance represented a kind of mystery that felt both haunting and deeply personal. She was a daughter, a friend, a young woman who had struggles but also had people who loved her. Her life, like anyone's, was complex, marked by highs and lows, relationships and choices, challenges and hopes. And the fact that her story ended in uncertainty created a lasting imprint on everyone who followed her case. Today, Tiffany Whitton remains a missing person. There have been no confirmed sightings, no remains have been found, no physical evidence has been recovered to explain what happened to her after she left the Walmart, and no one has ever been charged in connection with her disappearance. The investigation remains open, ready to move forward the moment new information becomes available. As long as her case remains unsolved, the need for awareness continues. Her family still seeks answers. The community still hopes for clarity. Investigators still stand ready to pursue any credible lead. The story remains incomplete, and the door to resolution is still open, waiting for the piece of information that will finally connect the facts. And so the aftermath of Tiffany Whitton's disappearance is defined not by conclusion, but by continuation. It is defined by the ongoing search, the effort to keep her name from fading, and the persistent belief that the truth can still be uncovered. Even in the absence of new evidence, the commitment to finding answers endures. The mystery remains, the questions remain, and the hope, fragile but present, remains as well. Share this story. Keep her name alive, because someone, somewhere, still knows what happened to Tiffany Whitton.